Hey Ravi, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
I am very excited to talk to you. I have been doing a lot of research on your company and like this whole ecosystem of like analytics and stuff like that. So I want to know, but before we start, I want to kind of know what is just for the viewers, what is Heap and how does your platform work?
Yeah, sure. So Heap was a company that I co-founded about almost 8 years ago at this point. And it's a web and mobile analytics tool that basically helps our users understand behavior on their websites, their mobile apps, things like that. And so a lot of product managers, marketers, engineers, all kinds of folks use Heap to basically get deeper granular insights onto what their users are doing and use those to kind of optimize the experience that those users have. There are a lot of analytics tools out there. You've probably heard of, many others in the space, but the main thing that Heap does a little bit differently from the rest of the tools on the market is that Heap automates a lot of the manual work that goes into analytics. So that's things like the data collection piece, especially. Typically when you set up an analytics tool, you have to write lots of tracking code and API calls and things like that. With Heap, you have to do very little or none of that at all to get started. So you can really go from installing Heap to getting value out of the product in 5 minutes.
Awesome. Any numbers you can share, like a number, like money raised, any month-over-month growth or ARR, or anything like that, number of employees?
Yeah. I won't share anything private with the company. So in full disclosure, I'm not there anymore. I'm still on the board, but I am not sort of full time at Heap anymore. But it's about 220 or so employees right now. $95 million in total funding since inception. In terms of ARR and things like that, I won't share the exact numbers, but it's in the tens of millions. I'll put it that way.
Amazing.
So somewhere between 10 million and 99 million. Won't be too specific.
Awesome. So I want to start this podcast with kind of knowing more about your journey, right? Where did you go to school? Were you always entrepreneurial? Was this your first venture? Like, how did this whole thing start?
Yeah. So I went to school at Stanford. I studied computer science there. That's where I met my co-founder from Heap, Mateen. And so him and I were both CS undergrads. I was class of 2011, so was kind of getting into a lot of this stuff when this kind of second wave of Silicon Valley companies was really getting off the ground. I think like if you look at the number of CS majors at Stanford every year, the year I declared, which was 2007, was a local minimum. So I think there had been like some sort of peak around the dot-com bubble, and then there had been kind of a decline, and then there was like a trough around when I declared, and then it like crept back up, and then now obviously it's like I think one of the most popular majors and things like that. But yeah, I had always kind of wanted to do something in software, like even when I was like very young. I just, I was we had the internet in my house really early in the 90s, and used to play around on websites and build stupid websites of myself and for myself and with my friends and things like that. In high school, I started like a custom T-shirt manufacturing website with a few friends of mine, kind of like a Zazzle sort of thing. But we didn't really know what we were doing. We kind of just like made it and then like kind of hoped people would come or something like that. I don't think really understood things like distribution and all that. And then it was kind of senior year of high school, and then we all went off to college and kind of forgot about it. Um, so like that was kind of like it was just something I was always interested in. But Heap was sort of the first thing that I did that actually really succeeded in any sort of big way. And so the story behind Heap is actually just to rewind a little bit. So I graduated class of 2011. Heap didn't start till 2013. In the 2 years in between, I was actually a musician. So kind of a random tangent, but I used to make like EDM for fun and like put it on the internet. And at some point, a lot of my songs on the internet started taking off on their own, and people started paying me to do shows. So I definitely like wanted to go into like starting my own company or doing something like that. But there was this like very immediate thing my senior year of college or a little bit after college where people were paying me a lot of money to go and play concerts and things like that. So I was like, I'll do that for a little bit. And so I did that for a couple of years, and it was fun, but it wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do. And so my friend Mateen from college, who I'd kept in touch with, he had joined Facebook for a little bit after college, but quickly left when he decided that he wanted to do a startup instead. He was working on this idea for Heap. which was basically the thing I described earlier,
Yep.
an analytics tool that tracks stuff automatically. He kind of pitched me on the idea. He's like, hey, you and I should work on this together. And I said, yeah, sure. Like I didn't really put a whole lot of thought into it, to be totally honest. It was one of those things where I had a lot of free time. I was making music and doing like the touring thing, but it wasn't like I was doing that 80 hours a week or anything like that. I was just kind of like playing shows on Fridays and Saturdays and making some songs during the week sometimes. So when Mateen said, let's work on this thing together, I said, yeah, that seemed like a good use of time. And then as I got into it and we started like talking to some of the early users and customers and people about the idea, everyone was like, yeah, this is a no-brainer. Like I would definitely use this if you built it. So it was like that. I quickly developed a lot of conviction that this is something that we should definitely do. And so we went through Y Combinator, raised some funding after the end of YC. And then, yeah, happy to chat more about the
Yeah.
journey, but that was kind of how we
How it all came about.
got,
Do
yeah,
you
doing
do you still miss the EDM, by the way?
not really.
No.
I
Okay.
didn't. I didn't enjoy the touring and stuff like that. I love making music. I think
Yeah.
that's like that was a hobby of mine. It briefly turned into a job,
Yeah.
but it's back
Yep.
to just a hobby of mine. So it's something I do for fun. I don't miss the touring aspect or anything like that, though.
Yep. That's so cool that it's such a two different worlds. Like one's like creative, artsy, you know what I mean? Others analytical. Like it's completely opposite worlds, and it's awesome that like you were able to try both and figure out for yourself like what we were kind of enjoying and stuff like that.
Yeah, for
That's
sure. I was very fortunate. I think that mostly I think the first few years of my career were just doing some random stuff that kind of I stumbled into, and it
yeah.
mostly worked out. I think that's definitely rare, but it definitely worked out.
Awesome. So like with Heap, now after so your co-founder, he asked you to kind of be your partner, like to come work with him. And so, what was your first thought? How did you think about it? Was that something you wanted to just kind of like check it out, play with it, and see how you like it? And how did that transition into like you being fully serious about it and be like, I want to build this big company?
Yeah. So for Heap, yeah, I mean, Mateen and I were pretty good friends, and I trusted Mateen a lot. I mean, the Heap was created to solve his personal pain points. So he used to be at Facebook as a product manager, and as a PM there, he worked on like a number of things there. But like basically, one thing that would happen very frequently is they would ship a new feature or a new product or something like that, and then they would realize after the fact, like, oh, we don't actually have the right tracking in place to like track everything we need to about this product or this feature. So let's make sure to get that tracking code into the next sprint. And then by the time it was in the next sprint or whatever, yeah, it would take 2 or 3 weeks for that to get out there, and then it would take a few more weeks for enough data to be generated to be statistically significant. So then it would take like 5 or 6 weeks for him to just like understand what was happening with a certain feature or certain product or something like that. And then so Mateen's insight was like, we're never sort of up to date with what we want to track. We should just be tracking everything automatically from day one all the time, so we like know exactly what we need when we need it. And so that was like kind of the insight behind Heap. And so it was really like I was like, I mean, if Facebook is having this problem, despite how much they invest into data and analytics and things like that, then clearly it must be a universal problem. Like that was kind of my logic.
Yeah.
And then so when the team pitched me out, it was really interesting to me. And I spent a little bit of time. By the time he sort of brought me on board, he had already like built a little bit of stuff. He had like a couple of early beta testers and stuff like that. And then so speaking with a few of those people helped me build a lot of conviction. So like I mostly just dove right into it, and it worked out.
Got it. And so like as it's crazy because like obviously you didn't come from a startup world, you jumped into it and you learned as you went, right? And so looking back at it now you have your new project you're working on, a new startup you're just working on now. How do you think differently now, like as compared to when you started?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like it's very different. I think so. Like Heap is a B2B SaaS company. Like we were so sort of like early, I think, in our own startup journeys that we didn't even have like that level of vocabulary, right? Like obviously we knew it was going to be sold to other startups or something like that, but we didn't really have an understanding of like, oh, here's how you like build a distribution engine for this kind of product. Like none of that stuff was really native to us at all. Like all we knew was that we had a certain problem we wanted to solve. We knew how to write software and we can build something to solve it. Like that's like the level of thought that we kind of put into it. And so we had to figure out everything on the fly, like around distribution and hiring and scaling and all that kind of stuff. And we made our fair share of mistakes, but we were also kind of, I think, very humble about like knowing that we didn't know that stuff and then seeking out kind of advice from other people who had done it before and looking at patterns from other companies and things like that. So this time around, I think it's very different because I kind of do know that stuff. I've actually done it once before, which is I'm in a very different position, I think, now. And it's a good thing because you kind of know the playbook to some extent. But I think it's also kind of a limiting thing. Like, I think a lot of the most interesting companies are those where people sort of didn't sort of just do the well-worn playbook the whole way through. Not to say that that's a bad thing. So I think you have to have a certain amount of judiciousness to like discard some of the things in some sense. And so I'm still figuring out what that balance looks like, to be totally honest. Yeah.
Got it. Nice. Awesome. And so at the end of your, like, I'm sure, like, as you were growing, as Heap was growing, because it was the hyper growth startup, that challenges were changing and you were learning as you said you were going, right? So, but with respect to, like, at any point, did it get, like, boring or repetitive after a while? Because, like, I'm sure as the company grows, there are things that you want to do personally, but they're not aligned with what the company needs. You know what I mean? Like, so,
Yeah.
so does that happen where, like, something doesn't excite you, but you have to do it? And how do you approach that?
For me personally, that never really happened.
Okay.
I wouldn't say that there was any aspect of Heap. I mean, there's little things like you have to fill out some paperwork for some thing you don't want to do. But like at a high level, I think it was incredibly interesting and rewarding. I think the nature of Heap sort of grew steadily the whole time I was there, and the nature of growth is that the challenges are just very different every 6 months. And so, 1 minute you're dealing with product market fit, and then you're dealing with, oh, we got to hire some people because there's a little bit of demand for this thing. Like, oh no, now we got to like hire some, go to market folks to help us distribute this thing. Oh, now I got to like hire, an executive to sort of scale this team. Like there's a different thing every few months. There's like a different challenge, and that variety and that like, is just really interesting at all times, I think. Kind of when the company got fairly large, 100, 150 people, at that point, I think there was still sort of a variety of challenges, and I'm sure there still are. But at that point, it was, I think, almost all the challenges at scale are sort of like people challenges, almost. Like, yeah, there's many strategic decisions to make at the company, but sort of your roles as co-founders are to just sort of mostly keep the company on track to what you already know you need to do in some respects. And so that it's definitely different. It's not worse or better. It's not, I kind of found it a little bit less interesting over time. But it was still, I think, a really cool experience for sure.
I had John from Sendbird and Curran from Cover, and they both said the same thing. Basically, they were like, as it kind of grows, they were like, I was just basically a sales guy, and it's more about just managing the people, like kind of what you're saying. And they both were saying the same thing. Like, I think John said he's like, I'd like to call myself a cheap begging officer because I'm always begging, whether it's to the investors or to customers or to employees. And then Curran was saying, I'm just a sales guy. Like, my job is just to make sure that everyone's doing their job right. And so it's crazy how once that grows, like, that is something so different than when you're starting a startup, which is all about just solving a problem. And now it's more about, like, making sure that you're just putting out fires basically, and everyone else is doing their job. So it's so cool that kind of grows that way.
Yeah.
So how did you? So as you said, like, so what was the biggest channel for growth for Heap?
Yeah, I mean, it changed over time. In the early days, it was all word of mouth. So we did like a Hacker News launch in like March of 2013, and like I think like almost 3,000 people like signed up for the product on that day, which I don't think you can do anymore. I don't think like there's too many SaaS products out there, and so nobody's out there like clamoring for the next one really. But back then you could do that. If you had a cool idea, you could just sort of throw it out there, and you get like a bunch of people to at least kick the tires on it. And then so a bunch of folks signed up. That was like March 2013. And then we did like a TechCrunch launch a few months later once we announced our funding round. And like again, it was like, I think you go on TechCrunch today, you'll get like 5 signups for non-qualified leads. But yeah, we got a few hundred leads to do that. But that was it really. We just did a couple of these like little launch bumps or whatever you want to call them. And of those people, the majority of them, tried it out for 5 minutes and then never came back. But like a few of them tried it out and were like, hey, this is great. I want to use this. And then those people stuck around. And then like After that initial wave died down, every day you'd get like a trickle of like 2 or 3 signups. And then I just reached out to every single one of those people. Me and Mateen both reached out to every single one of those people and was like, hey, notice you signed up. Let's chat, sort of thing. And then at some point, 2 signups a day became 3, became 5, became 10, became 20, 30, 50, whatever. But it was just like sort of like a self-serve kind of SaaS product that people could just come to. And like, to be honest, I don't know where they came from. So I assume it's word of mouth. But we weren't doing any ads or anything like that. And so that worked for a while. And still works to this day. I mean, there's still a ton of word of mouth demand for Heap. So that organic has never really gone away. As we kind of grew, we supplemented that word of mouth and organic growth with other sort of distribution channels. So now there's like a fairly large sales team at Heap. Some of that sales team is serving that inbound demand, but some of it's also like, working on kind of named accounts and doing account-based marketing strategies and things like that to bring in other folks, things that work more at the enterprise or mid-market level. There's also, I think, like a fairly large marketing team at Heap doing things like content marketing, which to generate more leads and things like that. There are some paid ads and stuff that we do as well, mostly on Google, things like that, but also like LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, that kind of stuff. All that stuff works at scale. I don't know what the exact distribution is between the various channels, but it's sort of a mature SaaS business and it's kind of doing everything at this point.
Got it. Since like most of the business, as you said, like it's very heavy dependent on like just like people, like it's sales and whether it's inbound or but still like managing the clients and looking what their needs are and stuff like that. Like, was it hard to hire for salespeople, like in an analytics kind of world, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this, that it's hard to hire for almost any role, to be honest. But yeah, I think sales is a little bit tough. I think one thing that was our product is a fairly technical product, and we sell to a very technical, savvy audience. And so you need sales folks who are conversant, like not necessarily that they're developers or something themselves, but that can be very credible when someone is asking you for about various nuanced differences between Heap and Mixpanel, and how's the data model different, and is it going to fit with my the way I think about analytics at our company or something like that. Like, you need someone who's kind of going to be conversant in those situations. Now, so most companies at scale will have kind of, if the deal sizes are big enough to support it, they'll have a distinction between a sales, like an account executive who's like the sort of sales rep managing the deal, and then and a sales engineer, which is like a more technical person, maybe even an actual engineer who comes in to sort of like provide the technical context. And so now we have specialization in Heap as well. But in the early days, we didn't have that specialization. So actually a sales rep had to be good enough at like negotiation and running a deal process and all that stuff to do a really good job as a sales rep, but also be conversant on kind of the technical details of the product. And so, yeah, it was tough to hire those folks. We hired some really good people. And like the first 3 people that I hired for that role, I think all of them, I think like one of them just left. Like, I think they stuck around for like 5 or 6 years there at Heap, and a couple are still there. And so I think we got probably a combination of luck and skill, got a couple really good folks for that role early on.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? Because I do advertising, and every time that I'm working with like Facebook or Google, and I have a rep that I'm working with, it's so hard because they're not spending their own money, right? So they don't know what exactly is going on, what problems that I'm facing, right? And so it's very theoretical advice. So I think makes sense on how important it is like to keep that fill that gap between where the client is and where you as a salesperson are. And so is that a challenge where how do these sales, like, is it something that you guys do within the company, or like with the training part of it, or how do they keep up with the gap from understanding clients' problems?
No, that's tough. And I wouldn't say that we're perfect at it. I think there's a few things we do. Like, we do dog food the product internally. There was a lot more of that actually earlier than later. So if you joined as our first sales rep, back in 2015, I think, then it was your job to sort of like work with a client, demo the product to them, answer the technical questions, get on board. But in some cases, even like use the product for them in some cases, because we didn't have an implementation team or anything like that. So you'd get them on board. They like the idea of Heap, but they'd be like, oh, I'm not sure how to set this one report, and maybe the one support rep we have is busy that day. So then you're like, okay, I'm the sales rep. I'm gonna help them with that. So like it wasn't like that. Our first reps were like hardcore analytics, power users necessarily, which would have been cool. But they were like honestly like getting massive exposure to tons of different businesses and how they thought of analytics, and they were like getting in the weeds and helping those companies like with what they needed to do. And so like one of the nice things about Heap that's a little bit different from other products is because we automate the data tracking. Like so let's say you're I don't really know much about most of the other companies, but let's say you're a sales rep for one of our competitors. You can at best sort of send your prospect a documentation link that says here's the API calls you need to implement in order to set up this one report. But they still have to do the work themselves. You don't have access to their code base typically. And you can't write tracking code on their behalf. But as a Heap person, once Heap is installed, you can go into someone else's Heap account, set up all the events for them, set up all the reports for them without any involvement from the client. And so as a rep, you're going to do that kind of stuff to help like close certain deals and things like that. We don't expect our reps to do that kind of stuff like today at Heap necessarily. I'm sure, I think our sales engineering team does some of that stuff, but the account executives don't usually do that kind of stuff. But like they would do all kinds of stuff like that. So I think they just got like a lot of hands-on dogfooding that of the product by virtue of just doing whatever it took to sort of to win a deal.
Yeah, makes sense. Wow, that's cool. I like how that's evolved. That's really awesome.
Yeah.
Now, just talking about the cons in general, because you were saying that the first 3 hires you did just turned out to be very good, and I'm sure like in a company where you had 200 plus employees, like there were some good hires, some bad hires, stuff like that. Not necessarily talking about Heap, but in general. Like, what is your advice on hiring and firing executives or like people, high level people in a startup?
Yeah, I mean, I think executive hiring and management is a whole different ballgame than folks in individual contributor roles. Like, I think I could give. Let me put it this way: for this new company, it's just 3 of us right now. I have a fairly high degree of confidence. Maybe it's correct, maybe it's incorrect. That the first few hires that we make in various individual contributor roles will do a really great job, because I think I know what to look for. With the exec stuff, I think it's a lot more difficult, and I think that's harder to answer. I'll sort of I'll do my best to answer it while caveating it by saying it's just hard. I think like with exec hires, I think you have to be really, really honest with yourself about what the role needs to be able to do and what the role does not need to be able to do. And so I think the mistakes I've seen other companies make and that we've made ourselves is you look for kind of like this unicorn candidate where you're like, they need to be great at everything, like every aspect of being a VP of sales or whatever, right? They need to be able to be a great seller themselves. They need to be able to recruit really great people. They need to be able to train those people really well. They need to understand SMB and enterprise sales, like everything. The reality is like, yeah, such people I think probably do exist. They're probably not going to join your 12-person Series A startup. If they're truly that great at everything, they'll go join Stripe as their VP of sales or something like that, right? And so I think you have to compromise on certain aspects of what the person can do. And if you do try to look for that unicorn candidate, what you'll most likely get is a candidate who is just very good at presenting themselves as someone who can do all of those things, but can't actually do all those things. But if you're very honest and say like, look, I really just need someone who, we're very early stage, I actually need this VP of whatever to actually do a bunch of individual contributor work for a while the team builds up, then you know how to interview for those specific skills, and you can interview for it. And then you're willing to compromise maybe on their ability to like scale a team of 50 people or something like that. I'm oversimplifying a little bit, but I think that's it's easier said than done what I'm describing. The other thing I'd say is like I think often like often you can get really I'm not sure how to phrase this in the best way. I think the best executive hires we made in terms of like people who we hired who ended up being like exceeding our expectations even were people who were actually a little bit junior. And so like we hired a couple of folks who we expected like, hey, this person's kind of junior. They'll probably do a great job in this role for the next 1.5 to 2 years, but at some point we'll probably have to hire a manager to sort of like come in over them. Maybe they're a VP, we'll hire a C-level to come in over them at some point. But we actually never had to in some of these cases for a couple of these folks. That's not to say like junior is better. It's more that like the person that we hired the reason we were able to hire them, despite extremely high talent, is because they were junior. And so by hiring someone who's a little bit more junior for that role, we were actually able to get someone who had a little bit more slope and trajectory, and they were actually able to grow with the company really effectively. And the person they are today is not someone we could have gotten 5 years ago when we first hired them. And so that's a bit more of a gamble, right? You might hire someone who's a junior and they're just in over their heads because they haven't done it before. Yeah. But if you can hire like the right people, and I think you want a mix, of course, of junior and senior folks on your team. But if you can hire the right people at the right stage in their careers, you can often get really, really, really great people who are destined to do great things, and they can do those great things at your company. The trick is sort of identifying those people early, which is easier said than done, for sure.
Got it. You brought this up before, where you said, like, as the company was growing, the challenges were getting, like, different, right? And even right now, when we're talking about hiring executives, especially like for a startup that is like, early as compared to Series A, Series B, like it just challenges become different, right? So as a founder, obviously, like, your job is to find the right person, but how do you know, like, as in specifically for that skill, what is needed from this executive? Because you haven't done it yourself, right? So how do you know, like, what this executive needs, or is it a good hire, or any, like, what are you looking for in that sense?
Yeah. So you're saying, like, how do you know what those skills are?
Exactly.
That you should be looking for. Easier said than done, for sure. And sometimes you don't know, you miss the mark. I think you got to project out. Like, let's say today is February 9th, and you've decided that you need like a VP of sales. I'm just going to make up a thing. Yep. Your company is 12 people. You just raised a Series A. You're at $2 million in ARR. You're growing quickly. You have a couple sales reps, and you're like, okay, we want to bring in a VP to scale this team and this sort of revenue engine from 2 million today to 10 million a year from now. Let's say that's what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
I think you have to think, like, if you start this search today, it'll take you probably a couple weeks to sort of figure out a search firm, a couple more weeks to sort of get that initial batch of candidates, and then maybe 4 or 5 weeks to talk to a few candidates who are probably not the right fit because you don't know what you're looking for yet. And then it takes you like another 6 weeks to actually like figure out someone you really like, and then another 4 or 5 weeks to close them, and then it takes like another few weeks for them to actually start. So actually, if it's Feb 9th and I kick off this search, best case, they're probably not starting at the company until like July 1 or something like that. And if your company is like a hyper-growth startup, now your 2 million ARR thing, by the time they start, is actually 4 million or 5 million ARR or something like that. And then it takes them another 3 months to like really ramp into the role and really understand the product and the market and like all that kind of stuff. And so now it's like actually like maybe like a 7 million ARR company by the time they're actually making any impact at all. And so I think the thing you have to think is like, what's the company going to look like by the time this person actually starts? And then think what does that look like? So these are all made up numbers.
Yeah,
but, okay, it's 7 million ARR. It's going to be a 7 million ARR company by the time they're actually in here and doing anything of value. If it's that much, like we probably have like more like 6 or 7 sales reps, and we have like maybe the beginnings of a marketing team too, and like a little bit of a customer success operation. So, and I actually want them to actually own not just sales, but customer success as well. So like that's the profile I'm kind of looking for. They've kind of done that thing before. So like that's, I think, like one way to think of it.
Okay.
Is like what is the company going to look like by the time they're actually in the seat, and like what does that job viscerally feel like, and then expect them, and then think about what does the next 12 months after that look like, and get someone who hopefully can span that. Ideally, they've done all of it before. I mean, realistically, if they've done all of it before and they were really successful, they're probably trying to go to something a little bit bigger or like have more scope. Maybe they did it all before as the VP of sales. Now they want to come to you as the chief revenue officer, and they want to own not just sales, but also customer success and maybe marketing. So like there's stuff like where you're going to have to like compromise on something. Like you can either say like, well, I want someone who didn't quite do it before, but like now, so they're a little bit more junior and I'm going to bet on them, or I can get someone who did do it before, but give them a lot more scope and maybe they haven't done those other things before. So like, I think those are the things that are more art than science. I don't know that I have a perfect answer for it. And then, just think through like, what is their day-to-day actually going to be like? Are they mostly going to be a manager? Or are they going to be like doing some individual contributor work as well? Are they going to be hiring a lot of people? Like, are they tasked to grow a team from X to Y people? Or are they actually going to have fairly stable headcount? Like one interesting thing is like, sales teams are usually quite big in relation to the size of SaaS companies. So recruiting is going to be a big part of that role. Whereas like product teams are a lot smaller, like relative to total headcount. So you might have a VP of product at a fairly late stage company who only has like 3 direct reports or something like that. that's maybe a little bit low, but like, yeah, maybe 6 direct reports or something, and they're going to grow that team to like 8 over the next 6 months. So like hiring maybe matters a lot less for that person as a skill than it does for that VP of sales who has a team of 50 that's going to grow to 100 or something. So there's all these kinds of things where just being really precise about what they're going to be doing day to day, what percentage of their day is going to be filled by various activities, and then mapping that to the skills you need them to have, I think is important.
Got it. Does it also include something? Do you also do something where like are you talking to other people, like other companies who are maybe one step like ahead of where you are, or friends, or like
For sure.
okay, you're picking up
Yeah, I
again.
would definitely do that. I mean, I would definitely. I did this all the time at Heap, where like, oh, we're about to kick off a VP of sales search. Let me ping 5 of my friends who have hired VP of sales in the last year and ask them what their interview process was like, and if they were happy with it, and if they would change anything about it, all that kind of stuff. So we definitely did a lot of that.
Got it.
I think that's like one of the main things like YC it does for you, not like YC itself, but you build this nice network of people. And like in our YC batch, there were tons of other SaaS companies that all had their own various trajectories. And those were all people that you could just text and sort of get their thoughts on, hey, what do you think about this way of doing things? So I think that's really helpful to have like a cohort of folks around who can just like bounce ideas like that off of.
Got it. Finishing up this thoughts, this topic of hiring, I read on your
Yeah.
website about and you mentioned it right now with the junior level executive, we're talking about hiring for slope over y-intercept, which I kind of read that from your website that it was some Stanford prof you guys took that from or something. I would love to know more about that because it's something I've never heard before, and I think it'd be really helpful for people.
Yeah, so I think so basically there was this Stanford professor who has a quote which is something like a little bit of slope makes up for a lot of y-intercept. So basically, if you have a line on a Cartesian xy plane and it starts really high up, but it's not sort of going very fast, and you have another line that starts over here and it's kind of like sloping a lot, this one will intersect this one really quickly and overtake it a lot. And the I think the initial answer was given in the context of like someone asked, like, hey, some of these kids are coming into Stanford as freshmen, like having coded their whole lives, and these other kids are coming in with like no prior computer science knowledge. How can those latter kids compete with the, coding their whole lives kids? And his basic point was like, look, if you learn really quickly and if you're investing in yourself and you're, engaging with the material and trying really hard and all that kind of stuff, even that growth mindset essentially, then you will have a lot of slope, and that'll make up for the fact that you're starting from zero. And those other kids, I mean, they might not have a lot of slope too, but like if they're not, just because they've been doing it their whole lives and have all this experience, if they see that as like, oh, if they're arrogant as a result and think they're better than other people as a result, and they decide not to sort of try as hard, they're actually going to be overtaken by all those other people who they sort of dismissed as inexperienced or something like that. So I mean, that's something that I have seen a lot. The best hires that we ever made at Heap were people who were relatively junior in their careers, but like had an insatiable desire to learn as much as possible, to try as many things as possible, and ended up having an outsized impact at the company as a result. And so we look for that quality when we hire folks. We look for people who are eager to learn new things, eager to try new things, don't see themselves as a finished product, no matter how senior they might be. A lot of junior people in Silicon Valley have that naturally. That's kind of what they gravitated there in the first place. With the next, right? Like if you've been doing this for 20 years, there is a natural tendency to think, oh, I've got it figured out. I know how to do stuff, marketing or whatever. But even then, like some of the most senior people we've hired, still have that growth mindset and still really admit that like, hey, every situation is different. Every company I've gone to is different. There's always new things to learn. And so I think that humility and that growth mindset is just something that we look for in everybody we try to hire, for sure.
Love that. Finishing this tangent, talking about growth in a high growth startup. Obviously, the challenges probably evolve, as you get more and more success. How do you market for different segments of customers? Like, how do you come up with pricing for them? How like up market versus down market? How do you think about that?
Yeah, that's really tough. And I would not say that we even did an incredible job of segmentation and things like that properly. I would say that like Heap, I think for a long time struggled to try and be all things to all people. And so, like you said, there were SMBs trying us out, there were enterprises trying us out, there were people in marketing teams and product teams and engineers and small companies, big companies, people who were like exec level, people who were like individual contributor level. And we just tried to like sort of play all sides. We tried to say like, every lead that comes to us, we don't talk to them. We don't care who they are. And like, we're going to try to like get them all in the door. I think, I think you have to pick. I think you have to have some level of focus. I mean, you want to have there are some really great horizontal tools out there, like Airtable, for example. It's not clearly for any one type of persona or any one type of person. But even then, I don't know the inner work. I just threw that out at random. I don't know the inner workings of the company. I assume they have on their sales team some amount of like delineations of like, well, here's what our like really good targets are, and here's what kind of like less good targets are, and things like that. I think you have to have some level of like, this is our ideal customer profile, and we'll talk to people a little bit outside of it, but this is where we really want to focus. And so Heap now kind of has that a little bit more. We focus way more on product managers and product teams than sort of the other departments that try out Heap and use Heap. We focus a lot on a few different customer verticals. We focus a lot on like e-commerce companies. We focus a lot on financial services companies, insurance companies. Focus a lot on other SaaS apps like Heap. But we like don't focus on like mobile games, for example. I don't think there are really many mobile games customers of Heap, or we don't focus too much on media websites or things like that. And so there's like, I can go into the details of why, but the high level is over time we kind of refine like, okay, here's where what we've observed in our customers. These are the ones that are retained the most at the highest rates. These are the ones that like really get a lot of value out of the product. I think if we had come to some of those realizations earlier, we would have been able to sort of grow faster, essentially, by just focusing our entire go-to-market effort on where we know we're best. So I encourage people to be sort of introspective about where your product really shines and where it's maybe a little bit more mediocre. It is more art than science. You can't just overly narrowly focus on one thing, the exclusion of the entire world. But yeah, I think that's important. In terms of like pricing and things like that, that's difficult. I think the path I've seen a lot of companies do, and that Heap does to some extent, is that you have a freemium tier that's relatively generous, that sort of catches the entire bottom of the market. You don't invest a lot of resources into that tier from like a support or sales perspective or anything like that. If someone signs up for that tier and naturally grows into a paid plan, then you have some sort of trigger point at which you go and contact them. And then you have relatively opaque kind of enterprise pricing. We say, contact us, talk to a sales rep, that kind of thing. That's a little bit annoying, especially for like startups and stuff, but because the free tier is there, they're not really encountering that all that much. So you have to get to a certain size before you have to encounter that sales team. I think that works decently well for us. And it allows the sales team to sort of like appropriately figure out the kind of right amount of value we're driving, the right sort of product set to sort of sell to various people and things like that. And so I think a lot of companies are doing that these days, and it seems to work well.
Makes sense. Cool. So talking about YC, obviously you said like how it helped with like fundraising, and obviously helped with knowing people who are in different SaaS companies and different SaaS founders who are doing similar things you're doing, whose brain you can pick. But like, how vital was YC for you, and like how important was it for where your startup is right now? Is that right now?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously don't know what would have happened if we didn't do YC, so I can't simulate the universe in which we didn't do it. But my thought is that it was really, really helpful. Like, I think YC was almost certainly the right decision for Heap, and we benefited a lot from it. And I can tell you the ways that we did. So like, number one, it helped with fundraising. And so me and Mateen were first-time founders. Like, we had an okay pedigree and stuff like that. You go to Stanford CS, people will take meetings for you. That is really nice. But at the same time, like, we didn't really have a ton of knowledge about how fundraising worked. We didn't really have a ton of connections into various VCs or things like that. And so by going through YC, I think they do this great job of kind of like preparing you for this like demo day thing, and all these investors show up, and you like line up like 50 meetings in a row, and then like you have like this like very competitive, tightly scoped fundraising process that just is sort of designed almost to go well. Obviously, not every YC company has an amazing fundraiser or anything like that, but it definitely helps give you a leg up. And so we were able to raise a really nice $2 million seed funding round, which is even today I think is still a pretty good round, but back then was like really large relative to what sort of like normal seed rounds ended up being back in 2013. And so I think a lot of that was due to the YC halo, the preparation they give you as partners, the sort of demo day effect, and the fact that I think like data companies in general were sort of like sought after at that point in time. And so I think the fundraising help is definitely real. I would say like the network is really great too. you are in this sort of pressure cooker with, like, in our case, 48 other companies that are, also, I think, full of really ambitious, smart, talented people. And so, like, a lot of those relationships are really key. And YC network in general is really, really great. So it's like, I mentioned earlier, like, if I'm going to hire a VP of sales, I'm going to text 5 of my friends and ask them what they did. Like, those are connections mostly from YC. Like, those aren't, I could have built those connections in other ways. Of course, it's not impossible. But, like, it's nice to sort of have that network of folks where no matter how niche your question ends up being about company building, there's, like, someone out there in YC, in the YC community who's probably dealt with that issue before. And I'd say the other thing that's, like, really, it's hard to quantify the value of it, but there is something to sort of going into YC every week, into the, like, group office hours and the dinners and all that kind of stuff week after week, and seeing everybody else's progress, and then, like, feeling pressure yourself to make a lot of progress too. And so this is sort of like competitive yet collaborative environment that's sort of like very sort of safe, yet also, I think, the right kind of pressure that makes you want to succeed too. And so I think if you're not in that environment, it's easy to sort of like make excuses not to do things. It's easy to say, like, oh, we'll put off the launch by another week. We're not ready yet. Oh, we'll like reach out to that one customer like in a little bit. Like, I want to polish out this one feature first. If you're in YC, you're like, shoot, I haven't made any progress, and it's like Monday night. We have the Tuesday meeting tomorrow. Like, let's do something.
Yeah.
And so I think you like, and then you get kind of like, it's like a game almost. It's like every week you're like seeing a little bit of uptick in like usage or revenue or whatever the metric is that you're trying to optimize for, and then that compounding effect turns into massive companies over time, of course. So I think that crucible of like being in it is really great.
It's kind of like Parkinson's law, isn't it? Like where the last you get most of the work done in the last few hours or whatever, like so you have your deadline.
Yeah.
Yeah,
a little bit. You have these kind of artificial deadlines that are being imposed on like a weekly basis, which are not. No one's gonna do anything to you if you didn't do a good job. You're just gonna kind of feel a little bit lame that all your peers have done a great job and you didn't.
Yeah.
And so like, but that pressure is really great. And so I know like I spoke to, when I left Heap and decided to do something new, I actually spoke to a few friends of mine who actually, with their respective companies, either sold them or left them or whatever, and then went back and did YC again. And I asked them, like, why did you do YC again? You already have the network. You can't get the network again. Like, you're already sort of plugged into that. You probably don't need the fundraising help this time around as a second-time founder. What was it for you? And they're like, it was just the environment. They're like, I know myself really well. I know that if I'm in that YC environment, I'm going to make a lot more progress than if I don't. And that's worth it. And so I think
I also think
really cool.
maybe something also to do with the fact that, especially once you've had a successful startup, there is this, for lack of a better word, ego thing, right? When you put yourself in that environment where everybody's like asking very open-minded questions and they're in a young place, even though you've had a successful startup, like you're thinking like that as compared to being like, oh, I've already done it, I know how it all works, and not having that closed-minded approach to it, I guess, right?
Yeah, I think that's a part of it too. It's like the thing if you do YC as a second-time founder or as an anytime founder, there will definitely be some like 22-year-old kid in your batch who's like a future billionaire, right? Who is like making way more progress than you are. It's like I think that is sort of humbling in a sense that just because you did this before doesn't mean you have everything figured out, or even that you're guaranteed to be even a mild success. So I think that's helpful for sure.
Awesome. I have one last question for you, and I was thinking about this. This is very based on like how you said, now you're working on a new project, and it's so interesting because it's very hard for me to like think about this, but like for somebody who has built an amazing, like a huge company, right? Now that you're like for a lot of people like who are building big startups, like it's more about, at one point it's not about the money anymore. It's more about the like kind of that vision of building something for the world. And as you get to that point, like, how do you think about like from Fulfilment's perspective, right? Like now that you're building a new company, like how do you think about that? Like what makes you fulfilled? I'm sure it's not about the money at this point as much. It's more about building something, right? So how do you choose what do I want to work on, or what do I want to spend my time on, or like for next 10 years of my life, for example, or whatever?
Yeah, that's a good question. To be totally honest, like I don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about, will this be fulfilling or will that be fulfilling? I got into Heap not because of a passion for analytics or because I felt the world needed this thing. It was Mateen's idea. He was already working on it, and I just thought it sounded really cool. And it was like an extremely interesting way to spend 7 years. And I think what I'm working on now. I think sort of similarly about. I think what I'm working on now is a lot more personal in the sense of like it's solving a direct pain point that I had back at Heap, and that my co-founder had at his previous company as well. And so I think there's like a level of empathy I have with the problems statement that we're solving, that's sort of on a different level than I had with Heap. But even then, I think like just that journey of building something really great is and really large is an interesting journey and a rewarding journey, and you get to make a lot of people's lives a little bit better along the way. The people who use your product, the people who you hire, all that kind of stuff, and that's interesting. But I don't think a whole lot about that. Whether I'm going to look back on this and feel fulfilled or not. I think more like, is that day to day interesting? Am I working on really cool problems on a daily basis? And I think I am. So I think that's fun.
Got it. Awesome. Awesome, man. Thank you. And let's finish this off with these 4 quick fire questions that I do for everybody. So we'll start with the first one, which is one unconventional thinking outside the box you guys did in your business, whether it's right now you're doing or you did with Heap or.
Yeah, let me think about that. With with Heap, I wouldn't say there's actually a whole lot of unconventional stuff we did. I think we were first time founders, right? And so I think we were very cognizant of things like, hey, we've never run a sales team before. So we did a lot of kind of pattern matching of like best practices of what other people did, not just like blindly copy paste, what someone else did, but just like, learn from the best and emulate the things that make sense for our business. So I think there's a lot of really interesting, innovative things we did on the product itself, like the sort of approach to analytics. That itself, I think, was an unconventional sort of out of the box approach. And to date, like not many folks have really even tried to replicate it. Even our competitors have mostly said like, we don't want to try doing that thing. That sounds hard. And so I think that's the out of the box part. But the rest of it for the company itself, I don't think we necessarily tried to like push the envelope in any one regard or anything like that. For my new business, I think it's a little bit early to say what will end up being sort of out of the box so far. Yeah, so I don't know if that answered the question or not.
No, that's fair. Advice for someone applying to YC.
Yeah. Here's my number one advice, actually, because I've talked to a lot of people who have asked for YC advice, and I've like looked over their applications and done mock interviews and all that kind of stuff. YC publishes a lot of stuff, advice on how to apply to YC. Like there's like blog posts by the YC partners who are like, here's what you should put in your application. Don't do this, do this. Read that thing. Because if I find a mistake in your application that was addressed in that blog post, like I see that actually way more often than you would think. It's like, don't ask me for advice. Go just ask YC itself. They're not trying to trick you. Just take their own advice on this stuff. That's like the number one piece of advice. If you've already done that stuff, then I would say show it to as many friends who are startup founders themselves or ex-YC founders themselves that you can. The other thing I see people doing a lot, this is not even just with YC applications, this is like in general, like fundraising decks and things like that. Or like someone will be like, yeah, I like made a deck, I showed it to like 2 friends, and then like I went out and pitched. And I'm like, that might work. I mean, the fundraising market is so hot right now that like you can probably do whatever you want and you'll get the thing. But like, every time I do one of these things, I'll show it to like 30 people, and get like a lot of different perspectives. And I'm not going to just take all of what they say. I'll kind of synthesize everything that people are saying and be like, wow, of the N people that I showed it to, almost half of them didn't even understand what this sentence is about. Clearly it's wrong. So like, that's like kind of what my approach is. Maybe my friends are annoyed with how much I ask them for feedback on this kind of stuff, but like, that's what I do.
No,
they can tell me if they're annoyed by it. They don't have to.
No, it makes sense. You're just collecting data.
Yeah.
That's great. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Advice for someone starting their first startup.
Oh, that's tough. It's hard for me to give like one piece of advice that should be applied in a blanket sense to all people starting their own startup, because
That's
like
fair.
startup is such a broad category. But let me try anyways. I would say like, to the extent possible, try to be honest with yourself and with your co-founders if you have them about your intention with the startup. What I mean by that is like, when I've seen like startups fail, I mean, there's obviously all kinds of reasons, but when they failed for like co-founder drama reasons, a lot. There's not one single reason, but one thing that happens a lot that I've seen is like these people wanted different things out of this company. Like person A was trying to bootstrap a thing and person B wanted to go the venture route. Or person A, it's usually not that. Usually that gets resolved, but it'll be something more like, oh, they both said they wanted to go venture route and do something big. But actually, when push came to shove and they got a $50 million offer, person A was like, let's take it. And person B was like, let's not. Yeah. Or it'll be something like, oh, both of them wanted to, build the future. I'm going to pick something at random. Both of them wanted to build the future of payroll. But like one of them really thought of it as kind of this like SMB thing that they go sell to mom and pop shops. And the other one really thought of it as like, let's go to sell to growth startups and like build like a big enterprise Workday competitor. And like, so I think you have to like make sure you're aligned on the big stuff, because like the big stuff is like, it's not even about like right and wrong, because there is no right and wrong about like bootstrap or venture or, SMB or whatever. Like it's because there's no right and wrong, it's hard to actually come to a consensus if you don't agree on that stuff. So like figure out that you agree on those sort of intentions for what you want to do with the future of your company and what you don't care about too. If you're like, I actually don't care for enterprise or SMB, you clearly do seem to care, so let's do your thing, like that kind of stuff too.
I love that answer. By the way, I've had that for my startup. We had a ton of fights because we had completely different way of what we wanted personally in life, but we never talked about it. We were just more like, let's get this going, because we thought once we have the success, then we can do that. But it's still a long journey that by the time that even would happen, you would have so many fights and there will be so many arguments along the way that if you're not on the right same page, it will be kind of hard to go from there.
Yeah, 100%. And it's like, even if you succeed, those fights won't go away. Like, I don't know anything about these guys, but like Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak pretty clearly had different intentions for what they wanted Apple to become. Apple's the most successful company in the world, and even that didn't like fix that conflict, really, right? No. I'm sure they're all happy with being billionaires. Those conflicts don't really go away, no matter how successful you get or how big you get. They just get magnified, I think.
Last question. If there was one thing that people could take away, something that has helped you in your life a lot, what would that be?
Again, it's hard to give blanket advice, right? Because my opinion is that like a lot of people need to hear the exact opposite advice of what like a different set of people need to hear. Someone might be told to be more confident. Someone else might need to be told to like tone it down a little bit with the arrogance or something like that. And so it's hard to give blanket advice.
I mean, that's a great one thing too, by the way, right? Like just like trying to figure out for yourself who you are and like how you, rather than kind of fitting into the blanket or like whatever somebody else might work for somebody else might not work for you. So understanding who you are or being self-aware.
Yeah, but even then, I feel like I have friends who've like spent way too much time trying to find themselves, and I'm kind of just like fucking do something, right? Like even then, I don't know if that's like
I see what you mean.
Advice on situations. Like I have friends who are like have spent a lot of time just trying to like figure out the thing, and I'm like, stop trying to optimize the world. Just pick something that is reasonably fulfilling, and
you need execution more than kind of thinking about it.
I feel like almost any advice can be like. I feel like for almost any piece of advice, no matter how anodyne, there's at least 10% of the population that does not need that advice. That like that advice is net harmful to those people. But they're also the exact 10% who are the most likely to take the advice and feel that it's validation for their particular pathology. But can I do think the thing I said earlier about the co-founder thing is a good piece of advice. I don't know. I don't want to answer it. Sorry.
Something to think about there for people. Yeah. Thanks so much for doing this, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. This is really fun. And let me know if I can ever help out with anything else.